Hi, everybody, and welcome to Two Out the First. It's great to have you here with us for our first video show of the year. It's March 12th, 2026. I'm Ryan Ballingy. If you've never seen the show before, we've got two topics that we talk about. They're the biggest stories in golf for that day. We do the show on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. Get you ready for Championship Sunday and the weekend, as well on the PGA Tour and the other big events of the week. We only have two events on the schedule this week. We've got the Players Championship, which is now underway at TPC Sawgrass on the Players Stadium course down at the Global HQ of the PGA Tour in Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida. And then we've got Live Golf in Singapore. They've done their first round. John Rahm's part of a cluster of leaders. I think Bryson DeChambeau is part of the group there, which I think is kind of a bold move, Cotton, to put up one of your events on the schedule up against the PGA Tour's biggest event, the fifth biggest tournament in the world. Some would argue the fourth biggest tournament in the world, and just have the event. I know they just had Hong Kong last week. They've got an extended stay right in the continent. So why would you go home? But man, that's crazy. That's quite a decision. Let's put it that way. I don't think you're going to get quite as much attention as you hope for. But a lot of the attention going into yesterday was on two things. One, would Rory McIlroy play in the Players Championship? And it sounds like he's leaning toward yes, but I guess we'll find out that eventually on Thursday. And then the comments that were expected from the still relatively new PGA Tour CEO, Brian Rolapp. Wednesday at the Players is typically when what has historically been the commissioner, but is now the CEO of the PGA Tour, goes before the media and talks about the state of the tour. And they do this again at the Tour Championship, usually just kind of brag about kind of how good the year was and maybe a couple of pressing issues, maybe some changes they'll make. But predominantly, this is when that happens. And this is really the first time Brian Rolapp's done that, right? He did it at the Tour Championship, little hand-holding with Jay Monahan, the guy going out the door in that kind of public-facing commissioner role. And I think a lot of people were expecting, because the hype had been built throughout the course of the fall and the start of the year, about the future competition committee and the changes that Rolapp seems to want to be ushering through the PGA Tour. And he wants to do them quickly. He wants them for next season. And he made it pretty apparent that he was talking about a bunch of different concepts to kind of make the PGA Tour product stronger. So I think the assumption after the scuttlebutt that's kind of happened the last few months among tour players and in the media, et cetera, that this was going to be the big unveil, right? This was going to be, here's where we find out what this is more specifically, what it's not, and how that all works. And in the end, we didn't really get a whole lot more detail than what's kind of filtered out through rumors and innuendo, whether that's directly from players like Harris English. I mean, Tiger Woods has been pretty tight-lipped about it, but some other guys have kind of alluded to things that may have been coming up in the conversations of the future competition committee and then being disseminated slowly to the players. There's only 6 people on the future competition committee. Tiger's one of them, of course. So what we know is basically what Brian Rolapp more or less confirmed, which was he wants to see a world where there's something like 21 to 26 events that come under the total schedule, that there are 8 signature events today, and he wants to kind of beef that up, more or less double it. I don't know if that's exactly right, but pretty close to double it based on the math. So from like 8 to 16. And then you would include the 3 playoff events, which they have greatly modified the playoffs this year. You get points basically at the level of a major championship instead of 4 times the level of a major event. You only have really 2 playoff events. There's no more points of the Tour Championship. We've done that already. So that's the format now. They did talk about that. Brian Rolapp did talk about the possibility of overhauling, rehauling. This is the 20th year for the FedEx Cup, rehauling the playoffs for like the millionth time. We'll come back to that in a minute. But he's going to keep those 3 playoff events separate for now. He's going to keep the 4 majors separate because the PGA Tour doesn't control them. And then the players would be included in that. So that's 8 events there. So if you're talking between 21 and 26 events, you're having anywhere from 13 to 18 signature events on the schedule. You have 8 today. So you need 5 to 10 more sponsors to agree to put on a $20 million event, or you need to dig into that $1.5 billion invested by Strategic Sports Group into the product that they haven't used it really at all, and put that toward purses for the short term while they get this all mapped out. So then what are you going to do with the rest of the tournament? Well, Rolapp says what we've kind of all heard all along, that there'd be a secondary tier which pretty much exists today. I mean, that's not really any different. There'd just be, I guess, fewer of them. And that there would be ways in and out of the signature tier of event based on what you do in the lower tier of events. So you'd have basically concurrent tours with about the same number of tournaments, 20 to 25 of them, right? Because the FedEx Cup playoffs would probably still exist. There'd probably be a way to play your way into it. The majors still exist and the players still exist. And that's your number, right? So that doesn't sound drastically different. My thought about them trying to kind of put the Korn Ferry Tour and the PGA Tour somewhat together, that doesn't sound like he's thinking about that. It's almost like he wants basically two 20 to 24 event tours that operate under themselves, and then there's ways in and out of those. He did talk about the concept of promotion and relegation, so having players have more fluid opportunities. His term was laddering in, laddering up into the signature events, whatever they look like, and then presumably being able to ladder into the FedEx Cup playoffs. And maybe you had a hell of a year in the minor circuit, so to speak, using Mario Kart terms, and you can then get into the playoffs somehow. Maybe that's how it works. One thing I did find particularly interesting that he alluded to specifically is the idea that he would want 120 players in the fields for the signature level events. That makes me think a little differently about this concept, right? So right now we're in a world where 70 players get into the FedEx Cup playoffs. Those 70 players are immediately exempt into every regular event for the following season. Then the FedEx Cup fall determines the next 30 players who will be the 100 players who are exempt. So and then you have the top 50 players who qualify for the BMW, they get in all the signature events, right? That seemingly has to change if that's what we're going to do here with 120 player events with a cut. Cuts are good. We want cuts. People want cuts. They don't like no cut events. But having 120 players is important. So you have 120 players with your cut to your top 65 in ties, all playing for $20 million purses. That's more access for more players. That's good. That's a good thing. Thumbs up for that, right? But now you got to figure out how you make up those fields. So you would presume you'd still keep the 50 no matter what, right? Like the 50 people who qualify for the BMW are definitely in this all year, all the time. So what about the players who qualify for the playoffs? Maybe the top 70 are guaranteed a spot in the first 3. Or we just say all 70 of you qualify for the playoffs, you're in every signature event next year. That's your reward for qualifying for the playoffs. The 50 is really the payoff for the points for the year. They've kind of modified this already in the playoffs, because most of the money now for the FedEx Cup bonus pool is going to be paid after the BMW Championship. And the Tour Championships become a $40 million tournament for the 30 best players. That format could change. They've talked about introducing match play into this. He used those words, so that's a possibility to try to spice up the playoffs. They want to make those more interesting. They've said that for 20 years. So put that to the side for a second. But then you either have your 70, your 50, your 70, or maybe even your 100 players who have full PGA Tour cards get into all that stuff, right? And then where do you get your other 20? Do you get your 20 from the Korn Ferry Tour guys? There's 20 of them. Do you get some mixture of Korn Ferry Tour guys and DP World Tour guys? There's 10 of those. Do you have players who come in from the bottom rung, right? So your Korn Ferry Tour guys and your DP World Tour guys, you presume, would start at the bottom rung, right? You're not going to jump right into the signature level right away. So maybe there's more movement in and out of each tournament. You figure out like the top 20 players in the previous regular event get into the next one. So there's fluidity in and out. I think there's got to be some of that. But again, there's no specifics here from Brian Rolapp. And I think that's not because he doesn't want them. It's because he's now fighting the machine. And I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. The PGA Tour, as we know it, has been around for getting near 70 years, right? And as we know it, as it exists today, it's basically my lifetime, almost 43. 1983, basically. And the all-exempt tour. So you have all of that, right? You're trying to fight that much history. This was a big change, right? To go from a 125 to 100 was a big deal. That broke like 40 years of tradition. To change the playoffs from 125, down to 70 was a huge deal, right? That was a big deal. The next tree you've got to chop down is, how do you get the players into these events? What's the fluidity? Who gets kicked out, right? We kind of have that sort of now. If you're in the top 50, you can be kicked out. There's enough transition year to year. 10, 12 guys get kicked out. That's not horrible, right? But there's fluidity in and out based on the season. So what does that look like? They clearly leaned into the fall. They're expanding the fall. They're trying to keep the fall. They want to keep growing the fall. So those events are $5 or $6 million. Is that the future then of the lower tier events? $5-6 million seems to kind of signal that, right? That's what the market can bear for that level of event as a new event, not one that's been under contract and is expected under that contract to pay $500,000 to $700,000 extra in purse money every year. So that money comes down to $5 or $6 million. But that gives you effectively 15 to 20 Oppo events over the course of a year. Those go into smaller markets. The John Deere Classic's not going to become a signature event, right? There's no way Quad Cities is going to become a sponsor for that. And so you've got to acknowledge that reality. But they've got a contract. How do you space out those contracts? What does that look like? What happens in the end to all the media partners? They've got contracts that run through 2030. Well, if you try to implement this change before that contract runs out, that contract means something different. So is the PGA, I think that Brian and Rolapp alluded to this in saying, the NFL, in a world where there's a $30 billion sports rights market, they're going to get 2/3 of it, in his view. It comes from the NFL. He's not a dumb man. He did these negotiations. He knows what's up. The NBA is going to get $4 to $5 billion. That leaves not much for everybody else, right? So for golf, you have to present a united front, a clear winning schedule. You got to have all your ducks in a row, and you probably have to break your existing agreement, negotiate early, set up a new one. Have it ready for 2028 so that you can do it for another 10 years, because time is not on your side if you're negotiating a rights deal and you're not the NFL. The NBA redid theirs knowing that they could get a lot of money, they could get more partners, they could go in the streaming world and still tap into that bank account of those firms. That's why they did it. MLB is in a tougher place, but they're trying to make those deals too. MLB has become more of a regional thing, right? I mean, you play 162 games in a market. There's just too many games. You can't make an easy big package out of that. They're trying to do the best they can, right? That's how they got NBC back involved with Sunday Night Baseball, taking it from ESPN. And ESPN went and took MLB.TV because they want streaming subscriptions. So what do you do with golf, right? How do you get that money? Brian Rolapp thinks having a very well-packaged, easy to understand for fans product that appeals to rich people and hopefully can appeal to younger people. And he talked about this too, said, hey, the average golf viewer is 66 years old, which I think that's a little high, to be honest with you, but it is high. I mean, and it's high like baseball, right? Baseball has got the highest average viewer age of any of the 4 major sports leagues. So you got to bring in younger people. How are you going to do that? How do you make that accessible to them? They've got to figure that out. He's talked about that. So that's, he's trying to get this all together so he can go to the sports media marketplace and say, we've got a great product. You're going to get all the superstars almost all the time. He knows asking players to play more than 22 events is probably a lot, including those 8 sectioned off that we talked about, right? So if that's the case, and Rory McIlroy played basically that number, including playing the Irish Open, the BMW PGA Championship, the season-ending event in Dubai on the DP World Tour. So he basically played 19 times minus 8. That's 11, right? You're not going to get him for every signature event, even if you do it right. So packaging together in a series of 13 to 15 events that you're going to get everybody. You got your playoffs and your players. That's a 17, 18 event package at the end of the year. And then everything else is just something else. Like either goes to cable or streaming or you own it or whatever that is. That's going to be a lesser value package. But, someone like CBS might take it because they fill the airtime with lots of golf on the weekends. They take the vast majority of the golf. This affects them the most, this kind of change, right? So they've got to agree to it. It's basically primarily for them and for Golf Channel, right? Now spun off into Versant. And they've got to decide, okay, our future is carrying 4 rounds of PGA Tour events and the early rounds of the signature ones. What is that value? Is that the same, less? Who knows? Also has implications for the other tours, right? Implications for the DP World Tour, which obviously doesn't really come up against the PGA Tour too often in TV time zones, but it sure does for the PGA Tour champions, sure does for the LPGA Tour, huge for the LPGA Tour. And the LPGA has an agreement this year, to have live windows and have all the tournaments available live. Well, what does that mean in a new agreement? I don't know the answer to that. So that's to be determined. So there's still a lot to be figured out. And I think the takeaway from all of that for me is there's so much that needs to be changed. It's a lot that needs to be changed. And it can't be done from July until now. It just can't be. This groundwork didn't exist. No one was calling for this internally, probably. So at least the way it's seemingly described by Brian Rolapp. So you've got a lot of things, levers to unwind, unpull, to pull again, right? To pull differently. It's going to take a lot of time. And so what they're going to come up with is probably going to take a staggered amount of time. This isn't going to happen for 27. Maybe some changes happen for 27. Maybe now that you have 9 signature events, because you got the one at Trump Doral, maybe you add 1 or 2 for next year. Maybe you get a couple upgraders. Maybe that's how it works. And then you slowly kind of build your way into it, right? You've got some contracts that are expiring. So those are events, they're going to go away if they don't get a new sponsor. Farmers Insurance Open at Torrey Pines, they need a new sponsor for that. San Diego is a radically popular event. It's a good one. Do you bring that one into prime time? Do you try to move some of the West Coast events? And there's obviously been open conversation about this now. Do you have the California swing close out the year? You go Los Angeles, San Diego, and Pebble as your 3 playoff events, or at least 2 of the 3. I think that would be interesting. Having the golf one in prime time instead of 6 o'clock on a Sunday in August. Have it at 8 p.m. on a Sunday in August. Probably a better idea, right? So I think that's going to come. But again, I was struck by kind of the lack of detail from Brian Rolapp, because I think the assumption was this guy is never going to be more powerful than he is coming in the door. That's generally how these types of things work. And then you lose kind of your value over time once you make moves that you make enemies. So you got to make your big move right away. This is his big move. But he needs the players to agree. At the end of the day, even though PGA Tour Enterprises is a for-profit subsidiary that has multi-billion-dollar investment into it from private entities, that's a subsidiary of a membership nonprofit organization that controls everything. So you've got to convince these people that this is the way to go, and here are the reasons why. And then you've got to undo everything that you've done for 40 years, basically, to make that happen. So don't expect 2027 to look radically different. Maybe 2028 is when it really starts. But you're starting to see kind of pieces of that taking shape now. The FedEx Cup has changed. That, I think, is pretty apparent. You'll start to see it more as they talk about it leading into the playoffs. I think you're going to see a world where the PGA Championship goes back to August. I just get a sense of that. That is going to be the last event of the year. And I think in a perfect world for Brian Rolapp, the PGA Tour owns the PGA Championship. And maybe, just maybe, the Tour Championship is merged some way with the PGA Championship, become a major. I think that's way out of the league right now, but I think kind of in a world he thinks that's possible. And then you've got to figure out the cadence of the year. He wants to start late January, and he wants to get more big cities. So that means he wants to look at tournaments more regularly in New York, Boston, Philadelphia, and DC, right? Because I'm a DMV guy. But the idea that the PGA Tour has basically abandoned the 4 biggest Northeastern markets for, I don't know, a decade now is kind of crazy. Not quite a decade, but it's been long enough at this point, half a decade, where you're not even in any of them. You're not in Boston. At least you were kind of in the New York area when they still had the Northern Trust, that and the Barclays and all those, those types of events back in the day. But they're gone. They don't exist. You don't even show up in that market. DC hasn't had a tournament except kind of a spillover event for the year that Charlotte had the President's Cup. That's been gone for, I don't know, 7 years, 8 years. So I do appreciate that. I think they do have to rejigger the calendar a little bit. And I think it makes sense. This is a for-profit business with investors. So the tournaments that don't make you money, they're going to go away, or they're going to be demoted. And some of the tournaments are going to agree to that. They're going to go, yeah, I'll have the $6 million tournament. The point is community impact. It's not about paying enormous sums of money for our business. We can still get a lot of value out of this. I think that's where that's going to go. So light on details, still need a lot more buy-in, I think, on what they ultimately want to get to. Then once they do all of that stuff, they have to go to the DP World Tour and say, are we going to buy you or not? Because they've insinuated they would like to buy the DP World Tour over the years, especially since this partnership agreement's been created. You kind of include any DP World Tour events in the bottom tier? Are they in the signature tier? Is there a fall just filled with DP World Tour events? I don't know, but he also doesn't. So we'll have to see about that too. There's still a lot to be determined. That was my takeaway. Ideas, lots of pie in the sky. Usually your biggest ideas don't typically turn out getting 100% executed. Some stuff gets shot down or modified or changed significantly, but the ideas are there. I don't think the ideas are particularly bad. There are some good things I was surprised about. 120 player fields, more Northeast stuff. A lot of the other stuff we heard kind of was, that makes sense, but okay, having a tier to go up and down with real relegation and promotion over the course of a season and in real time, that's a good thing too. There are some good things here. What that ultimately means for the communities in which the PGA Tour already exists, there's still so much to be decided. Last thing I want to talk about here before we get out of here, thanks to Fescue and Dunes for becoming our new presenting sponsor of the show. I'm also an investor in Fescue and Dunes, but go over to fescueanddunes.com. You can check them out. You can get fully licensed apparel, custom made for you from the best of the best in the apparel marketplace. Not only apparel, but bags, head covers, other accessories at fescueanddunes.com. Worldwide, great courses. So many of them in Ireland and the UK. And you're going to be seeing so many more club names and logos that you recognize on that platform. Head over to fescueanddunes.com. Check them out today. Last thing to talk about. Basically, Justin Rose made a call to Jon Rahm publicly and said, just pay the darn fine so you can play the Ryder Cup. He's kind of in this tit for tat with the DP World Tour. He doesn't want to pay the fines that he already owes for playing unauthorized events the last 2 years on LIV. And he doesn't want to take the agreement either that he would play 2 more DP World Tour events above and beyond the minimum standard for everybody else so that he could go play the LIV events without a fine. And he's made so much darn money. It makes no sense for why he doesn't want to figure this out. To either just pay the fines straight up every year so you can keep doing the 4 events, or agree to the DP World Tour condition and play 2 more weeks. What's more valuable to you? Spending $1 million-ish a year on fines, knowing that you're going to make that in 1 week, every week on LIV, the way it's going, or just play twice more. If I were him, I'd just pay the fines and cut him a check. Make a big thing of it, cutting a check every year. But I would do it so I could play the Ryder Cup. And Justin Rose, I think, is kind of in that position. Just pay the fines. I agree with him. I think he should do it, and it makes a lot of sense. All right, that's going to do it for us today on the show. Thanks so much for watching or listening. Catch us on Golf News Net YouTube channel, Golf News Net TV as well. And then if you're listening on audio form, catch us on your favorite streaming platform. I am at Ryan Ballingy or Ryan Ballingy Golf on your favorite social media service. I'm also tweeting, sharing, posting much of the time from the Golf News Net account, which is Golf News Net on your favorite social media service as well. Back for the weekend, the players. Hope you guys enjoy what you're going to get to watch at TPC Sawgrass. It's such a well-run tournament. They do a great job with it. With the PGA Tour's biggest week of the year. Enjoy the players. We'll talk to you next time here on 2 Off the First.